A slow but noticeable decline, I think.
But maybe you'll, you know, I mean, and Andrew Sullivan was looking at the camera saying he looked like he was a wreck. I mean, what is going on here?
Leonard Woolf's autobiography is called Downhill All the Way.
As Christopher once said, I usually get up at the crack of noon, so this is really it's tough for us, you know.
But no one
will be
says
all right.
no. No one says no to C-SPAN.
No,
Absolutely.
Or to you, Mr. Lamb.
Yeah, thank you. Are you still both British citizens?
What a question.
Subjects. We say subjects.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
both
well,
still
for a reason.
Yeah, but the reason I asked that is because the last half hour we were asking the question: is the United States the greatest nation on earth, as our politicians often say? What do you think?
Well, I voted with my feet, and I'm here. I came here when I was just after college, and had a kind of instant reaction to the country. I remember writing my parents after 6 weeks to say, I know this is going to sound weird, but I feel like I've come home. And within a few weeks of being here, I realized all the things that in England everybody had said was obviously completely wrong with me was actually relatively right with me. And instead of asking me all the time, why would you want to do that? Who do you think you are? I was.
You could be all you could be.
I could be all I was.
What about
or
you?
even more.
And now as you say, you're a wreck. Yeah.
And now I'm a wreck.
Well, I wrote a piece actually after September 11th saying that, you know, I've been getting by with a green card for all this time partly because I thought if I went around saying I was an American, in a way no one would believe me. You can't quite become a British American. You're sort of an Englishman in America. But that after September 11th, I thought I should take out the papers, really, as a kind of act of solidarity. I haven't actually done it yet.
To become a citizen?
And also now that, thanks to Attorney General Ashcroft, as a green card holder, I can be arrested without trial and executed in secret and so on. I thought, well, perhaps I should not miss the chance to do that, and I should stay with my fellow immigrants.
Because
he slightly qualified my enthusiasm for the national mood after the 11th of September, but I mean, I certainly feel as American as someone not born here could possibly.
Because this is often asked by people today of their friends and everything, let's start with Andrew Sullivan. Where were you on September the 11th, and what was your immediate reaction?
I was actually in Provincetown, where I spend the summers, and I was woken up by a friend of mine who ran in to tell me that someone had bombed the World Trade Center, and that is news we'd heard before, of course, 1993. And I didn't really realize until a little while later, when I got up and looked at the internet, quite exactly what it meant. But it was clear immediately what it meant, that war had broken out. And to me, that was quite an immediate, an obvious conclusion, and also that for the first time in American history, a huge attack upon the civilian population had taken place. And I felt distraught. I'll tell you why I felt distraught. I felt distraught because I do have a sort of love of this country's sense of able to make things new again, leaving the old world behind, having an entirely unique sense of security and escape from the world. And for the first time in American history, the world had come into America and raped her, and I was in tears for days.
Mr. Hitchens, where were you?
I was in Walla Walla, Washington, on the border of Idaho, practically, at Whitman College, giving the Scoop Jackson Memorial Lecture, which, among other things, called for the arrest and trial of Henry Kissinger, which I've written a book about.
Scoop Jackson probably rolling over in his grave on that one.
No, Scoop Jackson hated Kissinger because Kissinger was, you know, soft on Stalinism. Never forget that about Mr. Kissinger, by the way. He's always been groveling to the communists, and was to Brezhnev at the time when Scoop Jackson wanted to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. In fact, I'm proud to say the Jackson family came to the speech. It's his old college. And I ended by saying that you know, this could be a great period for human rights and for the internationalization of human rights and universal jurisdiction and so on. I went to bed feeling proud and happy, and in the morning got the news because I was 3 hours behind it. I was woken up with it. And I've answered this question before to one of your callers, as a matter of fact. I felt fury and disgust and rage and nausea, but I didn't feel fear. I found I felt a sort of exhilaration. I thought, if this war has been declared as it looks as if it has been by theocratic fascism, then it's a war I would never get bored with fighting, because it involves defending all the things I do like against all the things I don't, culturally as well as politically and intellectually. And I still feel that way. I think it's absolutely worth fighting, and of course I had no idea how well it would be prosecuted. I've since been in Pakistan and in Kashmir and on the Afghan border and so forth. And I'm ready to, I'm still ready to roll, if you like.
We have a long time with these two gentlemen. We'll get a chance to see where they differ. So far they haven't. Let's go to Hollywood, Florida on the Democratic line. Good morning.
Good morning. Brian, when I heard you were going to have these two guests on, I couldn't wait. I had to stay home. I thought it would bring a lot of laughs, I guess, into my house this morning, so I'm really looking forward to it. I would be interested in you asking, and unless I missed it, I think Andrew answered it, but I didn't hear it from Christopher, about whether they agree that America is one of the greatest or the greatest nation on the earth. And I would be interested in you following up and asking them why. In listening to the answers of a lot of Americans and non-citizens who called up, I only heard a few that really echoed my sentiments, which is we are probably, I would agree, we are the greatest nation on earth, but it's not because of our wealth or a lot of the things that people have discussed, but rather the individual freedom and the individuals like you have there. I think that come out of, even though neither one of them are Americans, that come out of a system and a culture that I think that breeds leadership. And along those lines, I wanted to say, as a personal note to Andrew, he's somebody who I admire, being a gay man myself, who doesn't always agree with what seems to be the predominant politics and thinking amongst a lot of my peers and friends and people I hang out with, and I just respect him for the courage and the leadership that I'm sure his path in life has taken him.
Thanks, Hollywood. I hope these two, if you're going to stay home this morning, do begin to entertain you at some point. But now we're being serious for a moment.
He didn't really ask a laugh-inducing question,
No,
did
he did not.
He hoped for mirth, but you asked what I was slightly lugubrious, but a perfectly good question. Well, there was a Teamsters union official once up on this hill behind us, who was asked at the opening of a hearing into his affairs, he said, well, wouldn't you agree the Teamsters union is a very powerful union in American trucking? And he said, looking rather narrowly back at the senator, he said, well, Senator, being powerful, it's a bit like being ladylike. He said, if you have to say you are, you probably ain't. So I think I like America most of all on the days when people are not going around shouting, USA, USA, we're number one, we're the greatest. I prefer the days when they don't do that, when they're probably most to be admired. It's a case of always think of it, never speak of it. Of course, objectively as well as subjectively, the American Revolution is now the only revolution with a fighting chance of survival and success. The idea that you could create a multicultural democracy over a vast expanse of the Earth's surface that could possibly be emulated by other people.
Manassas, Virginia, Republican line. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I think that the American culture is the strongest on the planet because of gentlemen like this who have come to this country and merged their heritage into our culture. And it seems like every time we get like an influx from Vietnam or China or Cuba or India or any other country on the planet, it seems to strengthen that culture. And that culture, I think, is dominant because we take the best of everything, not maliciously, but just because it makes sense. And we reject those things from other heritages that are bad.
Well, one of the things I would say, and I think Christopher probably agrees with me, I am thrilled by the chance to live in a truly multicultural society. I don't mean just in terms of racial diversity, I mean in terms of religious diversity, religious tolerance. The whole range of things that you get in the United States that you almost don't get anywhere else except in some major other cities in the West. To me, what underpins it all is a rather, in some ways, sort of solid foundation of a constitution that does not expect Americans to be the greatest people on earth, which expects Americans to be among the worst people on earth, and sets up a system of government that allows each particular branch to fight one another and each particular institution to fight each other in the hope of maintaining freedom. And by and large, it's worked in ways that that hasn't worked elsewhere. I would say one other small thing, which is the sheer democratic feel of American life, the sheer ability to say hi to anybody and have a civil response back. People talk about London as being a kind of civil or stuffy kind of place, and they're just wrong. They're getting that from Masterpiece Theater or somewhere. This country is so civil in so many of its day-to-day interactions, and the culture of equality. I think if you haven't lived elsewhere, you don't really see it, and that's maybe why, you know, I felt so grief-stricken when this happened, because I felt that something of American innocence and civility had been lost in September 11th.
Pittsburgh, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Brian. I wanted to just say a few comments and questions to both your guests, Andrew and Christopher. Christopher, it's your old contrarian buddy, Brian, in Pittsburgh.
Oh, hi, Brian.
You actually, you don't look that bad today. I've seen you worse in the morning.
Where are we going with this?
Well, that said, my comments are, though, as after the World Trade Center and all the terror, we did have to strike back. I'm glad that Afghanistan is where it's at today, and as opposed to all those years of tyranny under the Taliban. But that said, there's also a danger that I feel that a government can exploit that for a sense of perpetual terrors. I mean, we're always going to have a fear of there's always terrorists out there, whether it's in Iraq, North Korea, or then Plan Colombia in South America, and that a government could get away with like a perpetual. We're not, you know, at a state of martial law, but there's like always the danger of just over abusing that, extending heightened states of security to call for militias and things like that. And I'm just wondering what either Andrew or you feel about that.
All right, let me just ask you, though, before we lose you, why are you Mr. Hitchens' great contrarian? I mean, have you seen him before?
He came to, well, I've met him, met him and known him for a while, but he came to Pittsburgh to teach, and I did a cover story. I followed him for about 4 months, and I did a cover story for a sort of like a Village Voice publication in Pittsburgh.
Thanks. And what did you think of the piece?
So great, in fact, is this country that I could have been and was for a whole semester the Andrew W. Mellon Professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh, to whom you have the honor of addressing.
Now, he might have felt differently than Scoop Jackson.
It was a great American, another great American, Randolph Bourne, during the First World War, who made the imperishable remark that war is the health of the state. And there are a lot of people on the left and on the right who worry at the moment that states of emergency lead to the aggrandizement of the state, to the inflation of state power, and so on. That's a worry that someone who's enthusiastically in favor of the war on Islamic fascism can perfectly well share, and I do, for one, certainly.
On the front page of the Post today, I'll just read you the first paragraph, and the headline, Intricate Screening of Flyers in Works, Robert O'Hara, Jr. Federal aviation authorities and technology companies will soon begin testing a vast air security screening system designed to instantly pull together every passenger's travel history and living arrangements, plus a wealth of other personal and demographic information. Marion, Pennsylvania, on the Democratic line. Hello. Marion, are you there?
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to you.
All right. It's,
You talking to me? You talking to me?
My apologies.
It'll never sound the same.
I've been reading Nietzsche. I hope these two gentlemen can help me on this.
Oh, dear.
I've been absolutely floored by some of the things that I've been reading. He talks about good and evil. I also talk about that a peaceful nation or peaceful people tend to be cowardly because the ones that we put up as the victors are the ones that defy the morals that lead to controlling your emotions and controlling, your ambitions. Now, we live in a country we are great, but we instill in our citizens a sense of fearlessness. So therefore, the punishment for overcoming the mores, as we do, we have to upgrade or shift our penalties into higher gear to try to control our citizenship. He also spoke about other nations that a country that goes to war and says they're doing it for defense always has to undermine the morals of the other country and take the superior position.
Why, by the way, caller, are you reading Nietzsche?
I just picked up this book. It's The Portable Nietzsche. It's written by Walter Kaufmann, and he's one of the great experts on Nietzsche. I
like the idea of Nietzsche being portable.
Well,
that would be the last word that would usually come into.
You don't.
I think Mr. Bin Laden has been reading him too, because it struck me in the early statements that they made, and many of the interviews that these gangsters have given, they say that defeating the Soviet Union was the really tough thing. That was really hard, but defeating the United States would be relatively easy, because it's so soft and corrupt and immoral and so. I'd like to think that they've got that exactly the wrong way around, that defeating the Red Army was the easy part. But they made a fantastic miscalculation if they think that just because Americans have a tendency maybe to be a little complacent, a little inward-looking and too accustomed to luxury, that they would be a pushover. I'm sure, absolutely sure that that's wrong.
It's also
but that we have to prove it.
It's a fascinating moment to bring up Nietzsche because, and I think everybody should read him just to find out what's wrong. What Nietzsche was about, essentially, at least in some respects, was to say that there is no such thing as evil as such. That we can go beyond good and evil, that all these absolutes are actually all relatives, and that they can be recreated by anybody with sufficient imagination, that there is nothing solid beneath all of this. That he, in some ways, is one of the most influential philosophers of modernity in that respect. And what this war is partly about is saying, there is something called evil. The murder of thousands of civilians for a theocratic fascist cause is evil. And a constitution which defends religious tolerance and respects human life is good. And we are about to fight that evil with this good. And we'll do so also against this of course is the huge news of this week. We will do so also with respect to the despotic regimes in Iran and Iraq. And I think, therefore, Nietzsche is entirely appropriate.
Let's go to Alpine, California, on the Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning. A couple other things before I ask Mr. Sullivan something on the greatest nation in the world. It depends who you ask. Ask the children or the parents of the children who come to this country to have our doctors fix their facial deformities, or work. There's a lot of heroes that we never hear about in this country. Our hospitals accept people without money. Some of them, not all of them, of course, but some of them.
By no means. By no means all.
And ask the survivors of the Holocaust. Who the greatest country is. Mr. Sullivan, I visited your website yesterday because I knew you were going to be on today. I am a very strong believer in equal employment opportunity for everybody. I don't care who they are. Equal housing. I don't believe anybody should be discriminated against on the job or for housing or whatever, or harassed. However, this issue that you have with same-sex marriages, and that was a big issue on your website yesterday. I think, to me, that's a step backwards. I really do. I think it's just. I think it works against the family values. I think that it's benefiting the few for the detriment of the many, if that makes sense to you. And I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be disrespectful.
No, I'm sure you're not, and I appreciate your position. My position is the opposite. To have equality among citizens means to have the equality of opportunity, to have all the same things that everybody else has, the responsibilities as well as the rights. And the Declaration of Independence guaranteed the right to pursuit of happiness. Do you think anybody really has the right to the pursuit of happiness if they don't have the right to marry the person they love? And gay people are just like straight people. We just have the same emotions, the same feelings, the same bonds, but we're denied the ability to commit ourselves to another human being for our lives. We're denied the opportunity for responsibility. We want to have that responsibility. We come from regular families. We want to be married and have the same rights and responsibilities as our brothers and sisters in the same families. So that's what this is about, a very fundamental right. I don't think it'll hurt anybody at all. No single heterosexual marriage would in any way be changed by this. Religions don't have to acknowledge it, but civilly, as a matter of civil rights, as a matter of the state's respect to the citizen, the ability to have an equal right to marry is one of the most fundamental rights known to man.
Did you know that you were a subject of an editorial today in the Wall Street Journal?
I did not know that.
Well, we'll share it with you in a minute. Detroit, Michigan, Democratic line. Hello, you're on with Christopher Hitchens and Andrew Sullivan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Love C-SPAN. I got two questions for Christopher. Christopher, have you had any right-wing backlash from the book that you wrote about Henry Kissinger? I think it's a great book. And the other question I have for you, do you think it's right for Israel to be occupying Palestine for the last 35 years?
To the first, I've had some disobliging reviews from conservatives, but as also from liberals about Henry Kissinger. But no, I've also had quite a number of platforms offered me by conservative groups and organizations, and some friendly reviews from that quarter too, because remember, I was mentioning it to Brian briefly a few minutes ago, it was Henry Kissinger who defended the right of the Chinese Communist Party to massacre the students of Beijing in the main square of the city. It was Henry Kissinger who groveled to Brezhnev, told President Ford not to invite Alexander Solzhenitsyn into the Oval Office, and so forth. I mean, a practitioner of depraved realpolitik, as offensive to a principled conservative, I would hope, as to anyone on the left. So that's roughly how it's shaken out, and that's been one of the nicer parts of the reception. As to your question about Palestine, I've believed from the first that there is only one possible solution to a situation where there are two peoples, two nationalisms in one land, and that's two states. And I feel myself vindicated very much by the consequences of, which are very plain for everyone to see, of what happens if you don't have that. And not only that, but how those consequences, those alternatives are going to get worse and worse and worse. It's narrowing now to the point where either Israel would have to expel the Palestinians completely or institute a system of formal apartheid. Those are the only alternatives to statehood, and we like to think we had better be right, though it's not among the human rights issues that Mr. Bush ever cares to mention.
In today's...
That would teach people that if there'd been two states all along, we would have been spared much.
Sorry to interrupt. In today's Wall Street Journal, it's under this headline, Scribbler's Ethics. This is all about Enron, and I'll get right to the point here about Mr. Sullivan. Meanwhile, the internet ethicist, Andrew Sullivan, has been denouncing any journalist who's ever taken a dollar from Enron. This includes our contributor, Peggy Noonan, who disclosed last week in her OpinionJournal.com column that she billed Enron $250 an hour for 100 to 200 hours of speechwriting work. In other words, she got paid like any other contract employee, which is called business between consenting adults. The first time she wrote about Enron for us was also when she disclosed her Enron fees, so she has nothing to apologize for. Certainly not to Mr. Sullivan, who recently wrote a fine piece for this page on the failure of Talk magazine, but then without asking, resold the article to the Times of London, which didn't bother to give us credit. Mr. Sullivan's explanation is that he didn't think we had international publication rights, although the Wall Street Journal is distributed in London. Leaving aside the fine points of copyright law, Mr. Sullivan's behavior may not have been unethical, but it wasn't very nice.
Oh, please. I had no idea they wanted to run it again in Europe, and my editor in London asked me to redo it. I did a slightly different version in London. As to Peggy Noonan, I do think she's by far the most innocent of all these columnists who turn out to be on boondoggles from Enron. But I would point out something. She worked $250 an hour, 100 to 200. Now, someone doesn't remember whether it was 100 or 200 hours of work. Doesn't she have a 1099? Can she actually tell us how much she actually got from Enron? I would also say that she said in her own piece, none of the work she did somehow ever got used. It all just never quite got into Ken Lay's speeches. It was never actually a substantive piece of work that was actually, you could show was actually part of Enron's business. Now, I'm sure Peggy Noonan, who's a perfectly decent and good person didn't realize fully that she was being completely conned by these people. The truth is, this corporation threw money everywhere, and it threw it also at journalists. People like Bill Kristol, $100,000 minimum for doing next to nothing but show up for a couple of weekends in a luxury place or resort. Paul Krugman, the New York Times columnist, $50,000. Gary Kudlow, National Review columnist, $50,000, all for doing very little at all. Now, if someone comes along and asks you, would you like $50,000 for doing virtually nothing? A good journalist says, what are you really trying to buy here? And all I've done, the sin I've done, is point it out and just say, if we as journalists are going to start criticizing politicians for taking this kind of money, then we can hardly be taking much more of it ourselves and never disclosing it until we have to.
And can I just add something?
Sure.
And by the way, I should say in Andrew's defense, I mean, even if he played fast and loose with the Wall Street Journal at the Times, reselling a piece of yours twice is nothing ethically comparable at all. With what
Well, they said he just wasn't very nice.
Well, anyhow.
I thought they would be a little above that kind of thing.
The principle that some corporate culture seems to apply, including Enron, seems to me to be that of organized crime. The principle of that is you dirty up as many people as you possibly can, because then anyone who blows the whistle can be accused of spoiling it for everyone. So journalists, politicians from both parties, all across the board. They seem also to have succeeded in imposing the law of omerta on the administration, which says, no, it's only our business how we deal with Enron. What do you peasants want to know about it?
When I emailed Bill Kristol to say, come on, what's going on here? How much did you get? What was this all about? And who else was on this? They had an advisory board, this kind of shell institution, to pay off all these journalists. He said, and I quote him, "I will not rat out the others."
Sun Valley, Idaho, Republican line. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
Fish wrapped in newspaper.
This is Rusty from actually Haley, Idaho, and I believe you actually asked the wrong question. The question should be, if we're not the greatest country in the world right now, who is? Nobody's ever asked the people that are talking, as far as I know, on telephone, who the greatest country is, if it isn't us.
And in your opinion, is there a country that is greater than the United States?
We're not perfect, but who in the heck is?
Okay, I asked the wrong question. The real question I wanted to ask, and I didn't ask it very articulately, is it wise for politicians and journalists to say all the time out loud, we are the greatest country in the world?
I sort of agree with Christopher that I think if you have to yell that, you aren't. I mean, it's a good indication. I think there's a certain kind of patriotism which doesn't need to be expressed so crudely. It doesn't have to have a slogan on it. It doesn't have to have sort of be shouted from the rooftops. I think that after September 11th, however, the extraordinary flourishing of a kind of patriotism, the flags and everything, was something actually relatively healthy. In fact, extremely healthy. It was saying, look, we do love this place. We do care about it. We're not going to stand by while other people, for evil purposes, try and destroy it. And I think there's nothing wrong with that kind of patriotism, nothing wrong with that kind of love of country, right or wrong in certain circumstances.
Taft, California, on the Democratic line. Good morning. You're on with Christopher Hitchens and Andrew Sullivan.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have about 4 things I'd like to address, all having to do with subjects brought up on your program. First is same-sex marriage. Number 1, I believe that marriage is a financial institution and should be entered into by any parties, male or female or same-sex, as need be for their own personal gratification. Number 2, we have elected a cheerleader to the presidency, legitimately or illegitimately, it doesn't seem to matter. But Americans are acting like lemmings here. We're following along without questioning. Number 3, white-collar crime. I believe that all white-collar criminals who have inappropriately lifted money from public, private, whatever types of institutions should be in jail. Number 4, loss of freedom. Big Brother is taking over. I think I'd like to take the next space shuttle to Alpha Centauri. Thank you. Goodbye.
Mr. Hitchens, pick one of those.
I'll skip gay marriage if you don't mind.
Why? Tell us what you
it's
think.
somehow not my subject.
I feel like it can be so onerous to be the only. Just because I'm gay doesn't mean I should the only one supporting it. I know you support it. So tell us.
I sort of feel there are one or two subjects where I actually very occasionally wish there was less controversy. I know it sounds like a betrayal of everything one stands for. One of these subjects is abortion, and the other, well, one of the others would be gay marriage. But it's very hard to quarrel with Andrew about it. I mean, what he says about, in a sense, what he invokes is the concept of equal protection, which is enshrined in the Constitution. I don't want to quarrel with the Constitution. I've come from a country which doesn't have one, and I'm very glad to live in a country that does.
What about loss of freedom?
I should add, you know, I think for many, I don't want to try to seem glib about this, or flippant, but I think for many married heterosexuals, there'll always be a slight brow-furrowing element in this conversation. They think, well, they don't have to do this. Doesn't it kind of miss the point of their being gay? You know, you're never going to quite get over that ironic objection. It seems to me.
We don't have. I remember once I was in a meeting in London, and there was a debate about this, and someone said, "Look, I reject the whole idea of marriage. It's a ghastly institution. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And I think you're crazy to be supporting this." And I said, "Look, with all due respect, you can't reject marriage, because marriage has never been offered to you. We don't even have the right to say no to it. We're beneath even the choice. And all I'm arguing for is that we, as equal people within this society, should have the right to choose to marry the person we love."
Let's go to Palmdale, California, Republican line. Go ahead, please. We're on with Chris Hitchens. Christopher, excuse me, and Andrew. So hold on, we'll be back. Go ahead. Go ahead, Palmdale.
How you doing?
Bit early to say.
Sure. It's kind of early in the morning, so I have to think for a second.
Oh, you and me both.
I have a little rebuttal for the guy that called a little bit earlier that says he was a Vietnam veteran and cared to bash the United States as if we're supposed to be the evil people in the world. But and I dressed quite a few times for battle, so I know exactly what it's all about. I've listened to you guys talking this morning, and you seem to be speaking about from a view from outside the United States. You came here from England, which I've been over quite a bit of the world myself. And I believe you guys do have a point. I think the United States myself is one of the best places to ever live, and I do believe that anyone that don't want to live here or think we do have a problem need to look elsewhere. But for the question on same-sex marriages, what do you guys think about polygamy? If you believe in, if you go with the premises that same-sex marriages is because a person want to be with another person, they want to share their life with them. Could you answer that question for me, please?
Sure.
This is gay polygamy or polygamy in general?
Polygamy can't be gay, can it? Because
well, if you had gay marriage, it could be.
No, I think the actual word means a man and many women.
It does mean what?
Polyamory, I think, was the
polyandry
is the neutral. Polyandry is one woman with
many husbands. Yes. Okay.
Can I just answer that very specific question?
Logical pitfalls as well.
I know. Look, I don't believe that people should have the right to marry anybody. I just think that everybody should have the right to marry somebody. Gay people right now are denied the right to marry anyone at all, meaningfully. Of course, you know, they could force themselves into a heterosexual marriage, and with all the heartache and pain and foolishness that would imply. I'm against legal polygamy. I think it destroys respect for women. I think it can undermine family life and the upbringing of children. I do not believe that of homosexual marriage. I think homosexual marriage does the opposite. It actually strengthens family life and brings a whole group of people who do not have any essential rights, emotional rights in this country, into the fold of citizenship.
Christopher Hitchens, Bob Woodward, and Dan Balls have been writing a series in the Washington Post. This is the 6th. We read some of it earlier, 10 days in September. They got access to the diary of President Bush. They got an interview with President Bush in December to talk about those first 10 days. They talked on background, off the record, on the record, with a lot of different people around the president. Have you been reading the series?
No, I haven't actually, because I've been out of town, rather.
Have you been reading the series?
I intend
I've
to.
been reading it devotedly. It's an amazing piece of work.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because it's series like this, and why this program is here, and we don't do justice to it because we can't get enough on the table, but everybody, I would suggest, in the business of writing has read this piece. And I bring it up because I want to ask you, what do you think the impact will be on people who are in the media, who will continue to write about this president after they read these pieces?
I think that it shows without a shadow of a doubt what without sounding self-congratulatory, I think some of us have seen for a long time, that the notion that this president is some sort of cipher, that he doesn't actually have a brain, that he doesn't actually have a politics, that he doesn't have a morality, that he doesn't have a clear grip of what is going on, is baloney. He's been a solid, intelligent, smart, efficient president since he got into office. And what this piece does, I think for the first time, and it's authoritative in some ways for a certain Washingtonian coming from Bob Woodward and Don Balls, is that it shows that. It shows what I think is one of the most remarkably professional operations in terms of running a war and running a country at the same time that I've ever seen. And the reason why he has 84% approval ratings is not some mysterious, we're all getting on the bandwagon. It's because people are not stupid and they've seen him do it. Well, and they respect him for it.
Let me ask Christopher Hitchens, Mr. Sullivan's on the right, I guess. Would that be fair to say? A conservative?
It would be relatively fair to say, yeah.
Okay. He's just commented on an article written by Bob Woodward and Dan Balls, who conservatives would think, coming out of the Washington Post, would not like George Bush, but this is the 6th day of this series, and it's been...
Well, that's not necessarily so. I mean, Bob Woodward is a very notorious registered Republican, conservative Republican at that.
So the conservatives think the Washington
has always
Post...
been. And I don't mean to undermine this piece, of which I've heard great reports, but I mean, the last series of this sort that he did was on why Dan Quayle had all these unexpected, wonderful qualities.
With Dave Broder.
Yeah, with David Broder, though I think it's now not in the list of bibliography that Mr. Woodward has on the inside flap of his other books. The Quayle book's gone, apparently. But I don't mean to nitpick, because I was asked the other day, I was speaking somewhere or other, in California, and someone in the audience got up and read me back every word I'd said about George Bush during the election, which not unlike some of the things Andrew's just been saying. I said, well, would you still say that? And I said, well, what if I was right, and someone with all those disabilities, that apparent lack of curiosity, that apparent inability to read for pleasure, that apparent want of sort of intellectual weight, could still manage all these things? Maybe that would be a positive thing. Maybe that really proves that anyone can be president.
Of course it is, because...
Which is what we never let's forget. It's supposed to be, in this republic, possible for anybody to be the president. This may be the most exacting test of that proposition.
One thing that I think people often misunderstand, it was classic in Gore and Bush in that whole election, is that there is a difference between what you might call theoretical wisdom and practical wisdom. Christopher and I are both pretty smart people. We read, we're bookish.
No,
it's blah, blah, blah. So I think I'd be an absolutely terrible president of the United States. I can't run a whelk stall. Now, there are other...
Stall?
Well, a whelk stall, yeah, whatever.
It's a shellfish
is that
in English.
is that an English expression?
Yeah.
Excuse me, there
It's
it
an
comes
English
out again.
seaside expression.
It's an English seaside expression.
Absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
Oh well, I couldn't run anything very well, and when I was editor of the New Republic, quite frankly, I was a very bad manager of people, and but I can recognize those skills in other people, I think, and say, look, this is what matters in a president. He doesn't have to be reading Nietzsche every night, thank goodness. He doesn't have to be reading, Immanuel Kant every morning. He needs to have a sense of who he is, what he believes in, and ability to rally a team together to do a task, and he's done that. And also, I would say, the other slur on George W. Bush was that he couldn't speak a coherent sentence. His speeches, since he took office from the inauguration on, from a speech writing team that is among the best ever, have been really quite stunning. The September, I think the 20th speech and this last State of the Union were really among the most impressive pieces of oratory in recent presidential memory.
Chicago Democratic Line, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Brian. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Brian, I actually liked the second phrase of your question about the greatest country. The reason being is because, and this is a comment for the gentleman, to please think about time and space. I'm pretty sure that countries prior to us, Roman Empire, Germany, other great countries, when I say great countries, I mean in time and space, they too thought that they were the greatest country on earth. So please compare those particular countries, and certainly England, Britain, at that time and space, they too thought that they were the greatest.
Thanks. Mr. Hitchens.
Well, look, we're obviously not, we haven't exhausted this topic, clearly. Why not think of America as a lucky country, for example? It has oceans on either side of it. It has reasonably tranquil neighbors on the land. It managed to buy Louisiana for a knockdown price, and Louisiana the purchase meant this whole central sway of the United States. It managed to buy Alaska at a fire sale price from the Tsar. It doesn't get any better than this. And that's why I quite like the New York version of the national boast, which is this a great country or what? Now, I think that there needs anyone who just goes around saying unironically, well, if you know a better country, why don't you go there? The sort of love it or leave it thing is, I'm afraid to say, illustrating a quite different point and reminding people of other traits in the American character and traits in American history that are not so attractive or so wonderful.
However, I'd also point out that you're right, it's lucky, but goodness, think of those people that got here.
Oh yes, look,
I mean, the actual tenacity.
And it's made of oil and coal and everything that you can possibly imagine, uranium.
But still, the ability of these immigrants to come here and construct, in a matter of 100, 200 years, the most powerful and indeed diverse and stable democracy on earth.
Slightly rough on the people who are living here already. One should not forget.
To be sure.
There's a story, by the way, in
nobody's proud of that.
No one should be proud of that.
This morning about Canada's loony heading south. That's
Pierre Trudeau takes a vacation.
No, it's the dollar. It's the Canadian dollar. On January 18th, the Canadian dollar had a record closing of 62 U.S. cents. At one point during the day, it traded at 61.75. As the Canadian currency, known affectionately as the loonie for the water bird that appears on the dollar coins, continues its fall, more Canadians are beginning to worry. Some say that they feel poorer because they cannot buy what they used to buy on trips to the United States, and that back home it is driving up the cost of living by making imports more expensive. We go to Boston. Good morning, Boston.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. This is for Christopher. It's a comment, and then I have a question for Christopher. They mentioned about the greatest country in terms of the individual freedom and all that. Is it possible that we have all this in here, but then when it comes to dealing with the other countries, we're very undemocratic and very, in a way, really a dictatorship? I'm an Iranian American, lived in this country for 30 years. I actually left Iran because the fact that I couldn't survive, I couldn't live under the rule of the Shah dictatorship, who was brought by the United States with a coup in 1953. Now, anyway, my question is, I was very appalled and surprised, like many other Iranian Americans, who supported, strongly condemned these terrorist attacks, and Iranian officials, especially the Khatamis, section of the regime, strongly condemned and offered the help to the United States to track these terrorists in Afghanistan, and even willing to spend $600 million help to build Afghanistan, compared to the United States that is only willing to pay $250 million. This mention about Iran among the two other countries that Mr. Bush mentioned about this triangle of the evil, it was very surprising. What do you think? I mean, are we going to war with Iran? What kind of a mentality you think is behind these talks?
Okay, well, to your first point, obviously, no thinking American is proud. I don't think, or I would hope, of great swathes of American foreign policy. Not just the unforgettable horror of the war in Indochina, but, as you say, the installation of gruesome regimes on populations who do not want them, and regimes that act as a gendarme for American interests. The Shah of Iran, the Pahlavi dynasty, would only be one of these. General Pinochet, General Videla. Everybody knows, I think, what I'm talking about. Yes, and of course it qualifies the idea that this is a great society, because the test is this: can a large, generous, multi-ethnic democracy also be an empire? If it succeeds in being both, it'll be the first society in history that does. 5th century Athens, which I think was a fairly impressive society, managed to get by without being an empire. Many people say the Roman Republic collapsed because of imperialism. These are serious questions that ought to be debated very seriously. Now, on the Iran point that you make about, I thought that the President's speech was very disappointing in this respect. Whatever may be said about Iranian society and politics at the moment, it's clearly a society evolving very fast, probably itself throwing off theocracy. Without a shot being fired, gradually the Iranian people are repudiating a theocratic regime. It's not fair to compare this process to what's happening in Iraq and North Korea, and it was ungenerous in the extreme, I thought, of the President not to acknowledge this fact, because it puts in a very different light the fact that there are people in Iran who are opposing this process, and many of them, yes, are doing so by engaging in covert military programs.
The President is perfectly aware that Iran, in fact, there are pro-American demonstrations in Iran every day, pro-American. He's not talking about the Iranian people, he's talking about this regime. Now, this regime is also engaging in sponsoring, clearly, disruption in Afghanistan to topple or to weaken the current regime. It is clearly responsible for that boatload of lethal weapons sent to the PLO for use against Israel. On the West Bank. It has a client state in southern Lebanon. It will soon have a client state on the West Bank. It is one of the most dangerous threats to us and to the region. I was relieved to see that the President understands that, and that we will not go after the Iranian people. In fact, I think Iran is particularly promising to capture the regime or topple the regime because the people are ripe for democracy.
Orlando, Florida, Republican line.
We'll get one more.
Go ahead.
Hi. Yes. What I'm going to say is probably going to be pretty upsetting to both of you gentlemen, but I'm going to be as straightforward as I can. And I don't want to be cut off while I'm saying it, too. Do you believe in heterosexuals, we get married because our marriage is sealed by God. We follow the letter of the law. Now, we're not perfect, but we do. Now, you're saying we follow the God of who? Not just any God, not just any pagan God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The same ones that the Muslims, they claim it's the same, and the Jews. And that's why same-sex marriage is an issue.
Well, I will just point out to you, let me just follow up with that you have every right to do that. But we do not live in a theocratic state. There is a separation between church and state. For example, it is against, clearly, absolutely clearly, the rules of Abraham and indeed of Christianity that you can divorce. It is forbidden. But as citizens in a civil society, you have a right to a civil divorce. This is a society based upon a separation of church and state. You are absolutely, and I would defend your right to exclude homosexuals from marriage in your congregations or whenever you see fit, although I would disagree with you. But as a matter of civil rights and of the state and of a secular society apart from the church, you're wrong. It's a civil right and it needs to be defended.
Well, then let me defend my case then.
Okay, you go ahead.
Well, there really isn't a separation between the church and the state. There is technically but not really. And I have another question for you. What if a man says that he was very attracted to a beast, and he decided that he was born by nature to be with that beast, be it a dog or be it a whatever, and he decides he wants to marry it? I mean, how far in society are we going to go?
Thanks.
I'm sorry, but I find the equation of a human being to a beast, of homosexuals to animals, to be something that I actually beneath answering.
It seemed to me when you said that the separation of church and state was technical only, rather than actual, that you had to be describing the Constitution as a technicality in that instance, which I hope would be for most listeners, or most viewers rather, a sufficient rebuttal. The Constitution states very explicitly that the government cannot concern itself with the business of religion.
This
doesn't mean the religious people can't concern themselves with the business of government. No one intends it to mean that. Andrew and I have probably our biggest disagreement on this very point. He regards himself as in some way created and supervised by a supreme being. I can't think how anyone believes such a thing. I also think it's a very horrible idea, the idea of cradle to grave invigilation. Not only, well, it doesn't stop with the grave, according to people like Andrew. I think it's a really frightening and nauseating wish to be a slave. Fortunately, there's absolutely no reason to believe that there's any evidence for it at all.
This email from a woman named Ava Herring. Yes, if you are a white male, a rich white male in power, or with the perception of power, you can revel in the greatness of this country. I am a relatively poor black woman who is insulted by this display of our pompous president. Every time America makes these types of statements and gestures, there is a response from terrorists. After the U.S. arrogantly walked out of the conference in South Africa, 9/11 happened. Bush makes threats in his State of the Union address. There is more. The videotape is released. These things may be a coincidence, of course, but it contrasts sharply with what is the rest of the worldview of the U.S. Thank you. As we go to Cleveland, Ohio. Next, Cleveland, you're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen, all three. First of all, I'm a great admirer of both of your works, Mr. Hitchens. Actually, I should say all three of you, Mr. Hitchens, Mr. Sullivan, and Mr. Lamb. I really appreciate your not pulling any punches, Mr. Hitchens and Mr. Sullivan, speaking your minds, and you, Mr. Lamb, for not speaking your mind.
We're all behaving.
There we are.
Content's under pressure.
First of all, for the sake of full disclosure, I should say I know Mr. Hitchens. I've been to his home and brought him here to speak to Cleveland about 10, 15 years ago. My name is Ayad. I called on the Democrat line, although I'm barely a Democrat. I mean, the Democrat Party has just gotten so sleazy. I've been a Democrat since I came to this country from Iraq 30 years ago, but it's just it's lost me. There's nothing left that it stands for worth.
That, by the way, Christopher and I disagree on the most important things about, you know, whether God exists and whether he loves us, but we agree completely on the unimportant things, like Clinton was one of the worst presidents in American history, and we do so from very different angles, but our disgust at his presidency is one of the things that we can both, I think, thoroughly agree with each other about.
Indeed.
Go ahead, caller.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got two issues. This Democrat Party issue is sort of a small one. I always rank Clinton down there as down with Harding, you know, as far as this century goes, as one of the sleaziest. And,
You're flattering him.
Sorry?
You're flattering him.
Maybe. Well, certainly with his marriage, I would be. I mean, Mrs. Harding was outstanding. My other question, though, is about Colin Powell. Do you think there is a chance? I mean, I want to start a groundswell, a campaign to hound him out of office. Do you think that stands any chance, considering everything he's been wrong on, from back in 1990 after the invasion of Kuwait and his call to give sanctions and try, and then his fears that tens of thousands of Americans would die in that war, and his pulling up short during the eviction of the Iraqi forces from Kuwait, and then of course later with Bosnia and he being chastised by Madeleine Albright. Not to mention that he was chastised by Dick Cheney during the Kuwait crisis, and then again here with Afghanistan and the Taliban, and again on Iraq now. Could we tell this man that he should step aside if he had any dignity and self-respect, that he's been wrong, and to admit his mistakes, and not to be so concerned with his career and his justifying his past mistakes.
Thanks, caller.
I think that one has to make a distinction here. Colin Powell was asked to serve his president by the President of the United States. He didn't push himself forward in this respect. I couldn't agree with you more about Colin Powell's past errors of judgment. However, I do think that the notion that he and Bush are somehow not on the same page is wrong. Bush is a smart man. He realizes that it's important and useful to have at the table someone with Colin Powell's instincts. You want someone there to say, hold on a minute, wait, what do our allies feel? What is the diplomatic dimension to this particular war? And I think that Bush is smart enough to use him and to have him at the table. I also think that it is a very important thing for the United States to have a man who is not only of enormous stature abroad, but is an African-American and who can show the world, as Condi Rice shows the world, that this administration is also diverse.
Let me get a statement in here. Just to break, this has nothing to do with either one of you, and it has, I need to say this. During our call-in segment with guest Michelle Malkin on Friday morning, January the 18th, she stated that MicroStrategy Incorporated went bankrupt. That statement is erroneous. In fact, MicroStrategy is not and has never been in bankruptcy. Now, Mr. Hitchens.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what the backstory of that announcement is.
Oh, wouldn't that be fun? Huh? Yes. Well, the fact of the matter is she stated it, and it's not true. So
fair enough. Well, this is a very high standard show.
We did not say it.
I didn't mean to laugh.
I mean it. Look, don't want to echo Andrew again. I roughly would have said the same thing, but I wanted to add on the matter of multilateralism. Another vice of the President's speech the other night, I thought, was his failure to remind his viewers that America had not done all this by itself. He was very ungenerous, I thought, in acknowledging the help of other nations and other cultures. One of the roles of Colin Powell in this process has been to remind the President and also the American public that the United States is a signatory to a number of international treaties and agreements, including, say, the Third Geneva Convention, and cannot just make up the rules as it goes along about prisoners it takes in war and so forth. I think it's very good there's someone doing that. So, of all the times I would have chosen not to say, which I've often said before, that Colin Powell is one of the most overrated people in the United States, a man who pretended to flirt with the idea of running for president just so he could sell a book, for example. I thought that was pretty low as well. Of all the times one might want to remind people of this, now would probably be the least propitious time.
A couple of quick, I need to do this very quickly because we've got people waiting. This is an email. I have read that the National Review will list to the right because of the new ownership. Is this true?
You mean the New Republic?
Exactly, the New Republic. For Hitchens, it says, you and Noam getting along okay? Noam Chomsky?
Well, Professor Chomsky, who I've long admired and who's written some wonderful critiques of American foreign policy in the past, has had, and there's many other great scholarly contributions also, has had a disagreement with me or I with him over whether or not it's decent to suggest that the United States, as it were, deserved or invited the aggression against its civil society on the 11th of September. And I take the very strong view that one shouldn't have any truck with that view.
Then we got
that line, and we quarrel about it. So no, I would probably say our relations are not so cordial.
New Republic listing to the right?
I have no idea.
Two new owners, both Republicans, both voted for George Bush.
I've never met them, and I don't know. And what I'm told is that the editorial policy remains the same.
Cape Cod,
whatever that is.
Whatever that is.
Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. A question for Mr. Hitchens, please.
You're going. You're on.
Ask away.
Do you believe it's healthy for the United States to be so much influenced by Israel? We are a large country. They are very small, but they have much influence in the media and especially in politics.
Thanks.
Well, believe me, I know, I believe I understand the question, and there are various tones of voice in which it can be asked, including a tone of voice that I don't like, that suggests that there's a sort of covert Jewish hand that directs U.S. policy, which is not true, and very often clusters with other forms of unpleasantness. I do think that the United States gives far too great a proportion of its military aid budget to Israel and in return asks for insufficient Israeli responsibility. The Israelis are the custodians of the West Bank by an act of war. Their occupation of it is not recognized as legal. I've already said what I think should happen about that. There should be a West Bank state. The United States could make that difference. You could say to the Israelis, we will defend the existence of a Jewish community or a Jewish state in Palestine. We will not underwrite it becoming an expansionist and colonial state. If you want to do that, you pay the difference yourself. That alone would have probably solved the problem by now. And I do wish, yes, if you want to put it like that there was more cogent discussion along those lines in both the media and in Congress.
Let me simply say that the United States' defense of the only democracy in the Middle East, one that has been threatened many times, attacked many times by neighbors that want it to be extinguished. The United States' support for that little country is one of the reasons I'm proudest of the United States. And
does that mean you support its defense of the occupation as well?
I certainly.
There's nothing democratic about the occupation, Andy.
Well, no, there was nothing democratic about the war that was launched upon Israel that resulted in that occupation. People always ignore the fact that these expansions of Israel have come from defensive actions when it's been attacked by its neighbors.
1956.
Now look. I do believe, as you do, in a two-state solution. However, I do not believe that one of those states should be a terrorist state financed by Iran and run by terrorists in order to destroy the state of Israel. And I have no axe to grind here. I'm an English Roman Catholic to some originally. But I admire Israel, I admire the Israeli people, and I admire their tenacity to defend democracy in the face of exactly the kind of fascism that you rightly attack when it hits the United States.
Terre Haute, Indiana, home of
Eugene
Debs, Mr.
Yeah.
Hitchens' friend. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Brian. I'm so shocked I got on that I hope I can sound very rational in my statements.
You'll be fine.
But I wanted to tell you that, yes, people who have come to the United States and haven't been here for very long, yeah, they think this is the greatest country. But I want to go back. My family has been here for probably 6 generations, and we were the ones who came here and helped pick cotton, worked in the factories, built this country up, and now then, centuries later, I have a son and a daughter who they work harder probably than any president or doctor or lawyer in this country, and yet they can't afford to have health insurance. And my daughter this year has been through hell because she's had kidney stones, which were excruciating, and she couldn't hardly get medical treatment for her kidney stones. Now, my family and my generation have paid taxes all these centuries over here, but these two people who come over here, and I'll bet you $10 they have health insurance, and they're rich, and my children, my daughter and her husband, they do their own business, and they work, like I said, they work from daylight to dawn.
Thanks, caller. Got the point. Let me ask Andrew Sullivan, Christopher Hitchens, do you have health insurance?
Sure, I have one because I write for the Nation magazine, and we subscribe to the United Auto Workers health program.
Mr. Sullivan?
I'm a member of that. I'm a member of that UAW local. But it's not. I mean, it's the same as to say that you have to take care of it yourself. And if you're not lucky enough to be fully employed, you can be, as well as unemployed, lacking health coverage. And that's true of maybe 40 million Americans. And it's probably the most disgraceful fact about American society.
I'm lucky also. I'm employed by the New Republic, and they also provide me, I'm glad to say, with health insurance. And someone living with HIV on a daily basis, that's something that obviously is of pretty great importance to me.
Are you rich?
I think that I don't know how you would define that. I'm certainly not
in the
getting
sense of worldly goods, Andy. Don't worry, it's only worldly goods.
In the sense of what our caller was talking about, she said both of you had health insurance and were rich.
Well, she was trying to relate that to being immigrants. I came here with a little scholarship and didn't know a soul. But look, this is not that. The broader question is about health insurance, and the truth is that it's clear that given the extraordinary costs now of healthcare, and indeed the new technologies of healthcare, that if you're pretty poor, very poor, in other words, you get Medicaid, or if you're senior, you get Medicare. And if you're working with a decent company, you've also got health insurance. But there's people in the gap in the middle, the working poor, that don't. And I think we have to make better efforts to solve that. There is, however, not a very easy solution. I come from a country which has socialized healthcare, and the quality of that care is among the most disgraceful elements of that country. And I think if you were to socialize it over here, you would lose many, many, many of the benefits that the American healthcare system now provides.
Are you rich, Mr. Hitchens?
Yeah, I would say, as most people consider these things. I mean, I make far more money than I ever expected to, and I think I'm probably overpaid for some of the work I do, though I think I'm underpaid for some of the other stuff. And anyway, it means that I can do pro bono things like this.
Isn't it time for me in the program for me to ask you whether or not you're a socialist? I think that's a regular question.
Yes, well, I hope you see it. You've seen my, what is it, 20 years you've been taunting me about this now, and yeah. I think I may have refused the question in my own mind for quite a while, because I wasn't going to give you the satisfaction of saying, well, I'm not sure that really it's any more useful thing to say.
So today you're going to give us an answer?
I would, I think that if you ask yourself, is there an international socialist movement? If not, is it going to revive? Or if not that, is there at least a valid socialist critique with an alternative of the existing system of globalized capitalism? You ask yourself those three questions, and the answer comes back no, then you can't really usefully say you're a socialist anymore. But I feel it like a missing limb, I'll tell you that.
This is truly a new dawn, Christopher. Finally, it's... But I think you're ducking.
I've been writing about this for a long time.
I know, but...
Partly,
But look,
I slowed up on it partly because I wasn't going to give Mr. Lamb the satisfaction of saying uncle on this point.
Okay.
20 years of class struggle on this
I'm going to try and seize that satisfaction here. But the point is not that you keep saying that this is because of these external reasons. There isn't a viable alternative.
It's as much as to say that there is no longer a socialist position to hold.
But doesn't it clearly show, aren't you actually intellectually apprised of the belief that that clearly socialist countries built on socialist models have failed demonstrably to provide higher standards of living, greater creativity and greater freedoms than the more free market societies?
Well, you should have been present for some of our earlier arguments, Mr. Professor Lamb and myself, in that part of one's position was what does socialism mean, and does any country that claims it therefore earn the title, which would be your view, that the noble title of socialist could be claimed by any country that wanted to.
Our own country was clearly a socialist country from 1945 to 1979, and it ruined the United Kingdom, ruined it, immiserated it, depressed it, and only Thatcher managed to save the place from what was going to be ruin.
Los Angeles on the Republican line, good morning.
Well, good morning. What a great conversation to wake up to. I have a comment for each of for each of your guests.
We know how you feel.
I'm a gay Republican Catholic also, and it's nice to feel alone out here.
You make me feel less alone, too.
I would have thought one of the charms of being a gay Republican Catholic would be how few of you there were. It's a very exclusive club.
There are many, many more of us than you would ever believe, Christopher.
No, I think the place is heaving with them.
Yes. Mr. Hitchens, when you're at the Nation, do you ever get tempted when you're meeting with Katrina Vanden Heuvel to just reach over and slap that smile off her face?
Oh God! Thank God that was the. For a minute, I thought. For a minute, I thought that you were referring to the only temptation I have ever felt when in the presence of Katrina, which was a far more gallant one, I may assure you. Than that.
Gallant.
And well, gallant, more tender. No, I have to say I resent the question. No, I would not, and damn you for asking.
Let's ask the fella from Los Angeles.
Damn your impertinence.
Why he asked.
He's impertinent. This man was asking us if we were rich.
Perhaps it is.
This is the most impertinent man on American television right here.
Mr. Los Angeles, come through, please.
I just found her to be a little bit disingenuous during the entire election fiasco.
Oh, you can say that again.
And it was very difficult for me. It's still very difficult for me to even watch her.
Well, look, I'll tell you this for nothing. It makes me laugh the thought that anyone would ever have wanted Al Gore to be president, let alone Mr. Lieberman as vice president. And I must, there are millions of people around the country now who must be just so relieved that their vote didn't count. And I've said that in the Nation. But excuse me, that wasn't what you were asking. I mean, Katrina is very intelligent, very serious, very thoughtful, and in my opinion, fabulously beautiful person.
And also, I think she deserves an award for being...
The only temptations that I feel when I see her are entirely congruent with being not either gay, Republican, or Catholic. Thank you.
Of course, she also deserves an award for managing to reconcile completely unimaginable wealth and socialism. But there you go. That's a contradiction.
There seems to be a lot of low blows flying around today. I mean, I think that anyone seeing her, as Burke said of Marie Antoinette, every sword would fly from its scabbard to avenge a look that was in the wrong way directed at her.
Baltimore, you're next.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I have a quick one-line quote, and then I have a question for Christopher. Benjamin Disraeli once said, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." I know we've had shadow governments in local and state, and I'd like to ask Christopher who he thinks really runs the show.
One of the great things about living in America is that there's the fantastic number of beliefs that there are about who's really running it, which is, the Constitution says, should be, as it were, you and me. There are people who believe it's the Illuminati, there are people who believe it's the Jews, there are people who believe it's the Freemasons, there are people who believe it's just corporate America or the military-industrial complex. I think that there is a danger at the moment that there's too much of a lottery about who controls things, and that the price of entry into that lottery is very expensive. It's what I meant earlier by the relationship between corporate culture and organized crime with the Enron business. I hope and believe that many Americans, despite their current sort of patriotic unity, are really annoyed, if not incensed, at the ease with which rich crooks can get access to the highest circles of the government.
Mr. Sullivan,
and the way in which the government considers that that's nobody's business but theirs. Now, I think there should be a real outrage about that.
The critical catalyst for that particular cancer on this republic was Bill Clinton, who was the most aggressive quarter of corporate money for his own campaigns and others.
I don't disagree, except that I'm not sure he was worse than Nixon in that way.
Can I ask you both quickly
he was
about
as bad. He wanted to be as bad.
A current matter, please. Back in the fray, Gore announces PAC, gearing up for possible 04 presidential run. This is the New York Times, page A19 today. He'll give a speech in Tennessee on Saturday night, $25 a head fundraising rally in Nashville. We will be covering it live. Both of you, we know where you're coming from. Let's just keep on going. Warren, Pennsylvania. Warren, Pennsylvania, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. Concerning the greatest nation on earth,
yes, sir.
We are in a lot of ways, but if you take standard of living and infant mortality, two of the most important things to me, we're not even in the top 10. And if you take socialized medicine, we're the only democracy on earth that doesn't have some form of socialized medicine. I work on a loading dock, and I ask all the Canadian truck drivers that come in how they like their medical coverage, and to a man and woman, every one of them has said they like it. I feel that they're a democracy and they vote. If they didn't like it, they would vote it out.
Thanks.
Sorry.
It's very hard to vote out massive bureaucracies once they get entrenched with government money. You should ask them also whether they like their high taxes and the quality of care that they get. And that seems to me the more relevant question.
He was, though, implying they do.
Well, there's obviously a diversity of opinion in Canada about that. All I can say is that in the United Kingdom, the home of socialized medicine, the collapse of that system is now the biggest subject of domestic debate, and some public-private mix, some variation of that is necessary. I would also say that the free market in medicine in this country is one reason I'm sitting here talking to you today, that the reason why this country has provided the most massive majority of new medical breakthroughs is because it's possible with the free market in pharmaceuticals and in medical care to actually have incentives to produce new cures. And certainly the treatments for HIV, which have allowed many of us to stay alive for so much longer, are directly a product not only of, again, public-private mix, the NIH funding of basic science, but also small companies risking a lot, making new cures, helping us stay alive.
How long have you been HIV positive?
Coming up for 9 years.
This email, would both of you please go out on a personal limb and give C-SPAN's audience your prediction of whether you believe George W. Bush will be given a second term as President of the United States, and please share the reasons you see it playing out the way you do, from Mike McAnally, I believe, Round Rock, Texas. Quick, please. We got to.
Yeah. Okay. I would say yes, and I would say the main reason was that I can't think who the Democrats would even contemplate running against him or any other Republican,
And
not just
so-
against the successful.
I would say I have no idea. I'd be foolish to say so. The world can change overnight. I would say that the Fox News poll, in the middle of this 84% approval rating, showed Bush's re-elect numbers still only at 49. Very interesting.
The Democrats are still amazingly clapped out as a party.
Well, of course,
Johnson
looking forward.
City, Tennessee, you're on. Go ahead.
Oh, good morning, Brian.
Hi.
And Christopher, and Andrew. How are you today?
Good.
I was
So-so.
listening. Pardon me?
We're both feeling a little so-so here.
So-so.
It's like the crack.
Yeah,
it's
this
like
is
we're
new
still-
for them. They don't like getting up at this hour. Go ahead, caller.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been up since 7, so anyway. I was very taken aback by the rude statement from the previous caller who evidently thinks they're a Christian because they can be rude, but we Christians can't be rude. And I was very taken aback because of what she was saying was actually stemming from what happened in the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, and that was after, this fall of mankind. The sin entered the world, and people forgot who God was and wanted to go their own way. And from that, wanting to go their own way has stemmed forgive me for this, but perversity of marriage that was ordained by God in the Garden of Eden between a man and one woman, one man, one woman. And everything has stemmed from that. Well, the previous caller went to the far extreme into bestiality, and that is so abhorrent to God, as is anything that is of His divine nature.
Thanks, caller. Let's start with Christopher Hitchens on this. What are you thinking?
I was thinking about the talking snake and the Garden of Eden and all these sinister fairy tales. The caller sounds so sweet. I almost don't want to say what I think about the horror of these beliefs.
You do not believe any of this?
I think it is a very nasty fairy tale, and I'm very relieved that it's not true.
Are you an atheist?
I'm an anti-theist. In other words, it's not that I don't believe that there is a God. I think that the discovery there isn't is a huge relief, because it would be like living in a celestial North Korea if there was one. You would never be able to escape this attention. It would be even worse if it was benign, as some people claim it to be. I think it's a horrible idea. I think it comes from the slave element within us, and the wish to be looked after and protected, and in some sense owned, which I repudiate with every fibre of myself.
Well, Christopher.
So that's what if you want, I'll tell you what I really think about religion. But
well, that's fair enough. Let me counter that. We can come together on constitute. We can both exist in this republic as civil people. But I must say that the notion that belief in God and love of Christ is some sort of permanent slavery, that one lives one's life controlled and unable to have freedom. To me, at least, as someone who is a believer, is a misdescription of the way it is. In fact, it is a form of liberation. Without it, I know I couldn't have gotten through whatever life has thrown my way. And I also know in my heart of hearts that my being gay is something also that God loves and wants me to bring to its best fruition. But like straight people or gay people, we can all sin. We can all go away from God. But for me, Christianity is not slavery, it's liberation. And the ability to have, let me just finish one more point, the ability to have some perspective on the world, some place to go, where this world's daily pressures does not get you and cannot get you, is an incredibly liberating and important experience. And so many people have it, and I am very glad that God is near.
See, all that's supposed to sound, and does in a way, modest and humble and so forth, but think of what an incredibly solipsistic and arrogant claim it really is. You claim to know what God wants.
No, I don't.
You claim to think He has a plan for you.
No, I do think that. I don't know what it is.
This is an unbelievable conceit of the supposedly humble and meek.
Well, yes, it is an amazing conceit. It's an amazing conceit,
here's why I think it's authoritarian. I'm told that there was a human sacrifice that took place 2,000 years or so ago, in which I had no say which would not have taken place if I'd had anything to do with it, but which has saved me whether I want to be saved or not.
Well,
I don't like to be talked to in that tone of voice.
Well, then you're talking about
I really don't.
a certain kind
when
of...
it isn't sickly, it's rather authoritarian, that kind of talk. And you
about...
managed to combine in your own approach a tiny element of each. I'm very sorry to have to tell you.
Tulsa, Oklahoma on the Democratic line. You're next.
Hello.
You're on the air, sir. Thank you.
This is my first time caller, so I might be a little nervous.
That's nice to have you with us.
Okay, my question is, I know I've watched you all this morning debating the greatness of the United States and past empires, but my question is, recently there was a week-long special on the Congo and what's going on over there, and my thinking is, you know, we've discussed military power and great wealth as a defining difference of greatness as a nation. But do you think we could do anything with respect to the natural disasters that are going on in the world, and maybe that we could claim our greatness in history if we were to take a more active role as a country and be much more involved in those areas and trying to help people? I realize, you know, some of those things are natural disasters and that they're not our fault by any means, but as, you know, coming from a Christian point of view, isn't it to our advantage to take advantage of those situations?
Thanks, caller.
I think not only can we must. However, I would say the following thing. I think it's also very important that we don't cripple countries with a kind of dependency. There's a kind of aid which can lift people up, and there is a kind of aid that can actually just go to certain tyrannies or certain regimes that simply keep the people down, and certainly do not encourage the kind of enterprise and self-help that will actually rescue and help rescue these countries. So I think we have to have some sort of way of helping the needy without imprisoning them in a welfare dependency, and that's the very difficult task that foreign aid has to do.
It ought not to be forgotten, and in fact it ought to be regularly emphasized that the United States and the people of the United States already have a huge responsibility for what's going on in the Congo. We're a country which I've visited, probably the most stricken place on earth at the moment, not exempting parts of Afghanistan. In 1963, the President of the United States gave the order for the murder of the first independent leader of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. The United States has ever afterwards, until very recently, been the patron of the most sordid kleptocratic regime there, that of General Mobutu, which was in power when I was there. It now cannot disown responsibility for what it's done, which is probably so horrific that people are unwilling to face it, but must be faced all the same.
Could, well, first of all, Christopher Hitchens is a graduate of Balliol College at Oxford. Who'd you go to school with there?
Contemporary of mine at Oxford. Well, that was when Mr. Clinton and Mr. Strobe Talbot and Robert Reich and all that lot were the Rhodes Scholars, and I hate to think that we'll ever be thought of as the Clinton generation. In fact, we won't be.
What year? What year?
I knew we decline it. I didn't know Mr. Clinton very well. I remember the address. I remember the address where he lived, because there were a lot of American anti-war people living in that house, and I was a great friend of any American who was against the war. And we had a girlfriend in common, Mr. Clinton and myself, for a while.
A girlfriend in common?
Yes.
At the same time?
No, excuse me. I mean, well, I hope, what I have to say is I hope not. But we have both been friends with the same girl. I used to wonder, now you happen to mention it.
Does that make you about 55 years old?
No, it means I'll be 53 in April.
And Mr. Sullivan, how old are you?
I'm 38.
And you're a graduate PhD from Harvard, correct?
And Oxford, yes.
Let me ask you one quick question before I take a call. This is way off the subject, but I just want to get your philosophical answer to the question. What do you think of the Super Bowl?
I don't do sports.
At all?
No.
So what do you think of the concept?
They made me do them a lot in English boarding schools for years and years. I had to get up, have a cold shower, play games, and then do some Latin. When that was over, I thought, I'm never doing any of that again.
But it's usually the single most watched television show in America.
It's also a great form of male bonding, but I find I can do without it.
And Mr. Sullivan?
Well, I now have a boyfriend who is an obsessive football fan. I wake up, go to bed to the sound of him watching football and cracking six-packs. So, which can be a cheerful experience. I would say almost an erotic experience.
Excuse me, this is your idea of marriage.
It is my idea of marriage.
Sorry.
He's also, however, it
sounds very like a heterosexual...
It is exactly like a heterosexual marriage. He's also, however, I must say, as well as being a complete sports jock and sports maniac, a professor, which is, in my view, the best of all possible worlds. So I've learned a lot about football from him, and I have a feeling I'm going to learn a lot more.
In the next half hour, I'd like to see, and this is possible, where the differences are between you two gentlemen after all these years on different things, quick differences. Let's go to Long Island, New York, on the Republican line. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for your program. It's the first time I'm calling. My question is addressed to Mr. Hitchens, please. It's a two-part question. Number one, in order for America to be the greatest nation on earth, can you explain at what price? Isn't it at price of exploiting other countries, their natural resources, and bringing all the brains and all the talented people here? And number two, Mr. Hitchens, please explain for me, because I respect your work and your opinion. How do you define terrorism? Is it a different definition for it? Isn't it what Israel is doing, assassinating people and killing children and innocent civilians in hundreds and over the years in millions? Isn't that terrorism?
Thanks, caller.
Well, on the first point about exploitation, as you call it, I mean, as I mentioned before about the Congo, and I could have mentioned for the other countries too, there are places where the United States has entered into alliances with predatory elites for its own benefit, or for the benefit of small groups of Americans. It's a disgraceful business. There are many people also who believe, not all of them are radicals like myself, that the United States is better off tending to its own business, and that ever since perhaps as far back as 1898, expansionism has had its major downsides. That's a huge debate. I don't think the United States needs, or as a society requires of itself, that it exploit others. No. I mean, it could on its own resources get by, so it's not, there's no imperial imperative. I always avoid the use of the word terrorism where I can, because it has become far too generalized and loaded and ideologized in so many ways. And it can be used by anyone who isn't a pacifist to say that it's the pursuit of politics by forcible means. I think if you wanted a definition, it would be the exclusive concentration on the disruption of civilian life and the taking of civilian life as an end as well as a tactic, as something good in itself as well as a means to another end. And that's the purely double distilled essence of it that one saw on September 11th, but I still prefer to call that religious fascism, because that's what it really is.
Let me say, this notion of exploitation...
And as for the Israelis, everybody knows that, because I mustn't seem to duck that question, because I know how toxic it is, everybody knows that if you want to occupy people against their will, if you want to be the governor of another people who haven't chosen you, you will end up visiting terrible cruelty on them. There certainly cannot be a humane occupation.
Andrew Sullivan?
I would say, quite simply, this concept of exploitation, the idea that America, by being a beacon for many other people around the world, is somehow exploiting other countries, is baloney. The reason people come here is because it's freer here. If those countries in the Middle East don't want to be exploited, get yourselves democracy. Get yourselves a free market. Why are we making excuses for countries that do not do the obvious thing to create wealth and power and security and freedom for their citizens? It is not America's responsibility to do that. I also say that the context in which Christopher's been talking about, many of America's foreign engagements, and some of which I agree with him, have not been pretty, was the context of a global struggle against tyranny called the Soviet Union, in which many things were done which, in an ideal world, one would have regretted, and one does regret. However, the alternative, which was caving in to those thugs in Moscow, was much worse. I'd also say that no country in the history of the world has had this much disproportionate power and wielded it so gently. Well, there's no actual occupation of places against their will by the United States. in any meaningful sense compared to the British
Well,
or
I
the
don't know
Germans
when.
or any other
I
previous
do not know
empire.
when. I don't actually know when it was that the Cuban people signed off on having the Guantanamo base on their soil. To give you a small example,
compare
but it is
Guantanamo
certainly
Bay
true. It is
with the
certainly
British
true,
Empire or
but excuse me,
or Nazi
it's certainly
occupation
true
or
that the American occupation of Cuba and of many other territories in Central and South America well predates the Bolshevik Revolution even. So your critique is ahistorical as well as politically, I think, rather opportunist.
Bradenton, Florida. You're on the air.
Opportunist.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. Likewise to you, Brian, and C-SPAN. 3 quick things, if I could. First, I believe that when the president uses general terms like good and evil to describe our conflicts, he kind of crosses the line between separation of church and state. Secondly, Brian, you asked a week or so ago people about campaign finance reform, and I think it's not as important what people give to the congressman, but more what they give back, retroactive tax breaks. Thirdly, though, my influences are people like Alan Watts and Joseph Campbell, and there's an old Chinese proverb that virtue that strives to be virtue is not virtue. Virtue that's not aware of itself is true virtue.
Thanks. Let me ask the two of you some things. There's a big newspaper article on both of you in the New York Observer a couple of weeks ago. The two of you are competing to become the George Orwell of America. Yes. Did you buy off on that?
An acutely embarrassing article, I thought.
Embarrassing because...
It was meant to be flattering, and it was extremely complimentary.
By Ron Rosenbaum?
By Mr. Rosenbaum, who... well, he opened with a question, which was why were 2 English writers, in his view, producing the best stuff on the consequences of September 11th. That's a compliment one could perhaps accept. I mean, I think it would be rather extreme. But to be compared with George Orwell, whose entire life was a sacrifice and a battle and a risk. And so
he was a socialist.
And certainly was. And he's my gold standard for a leftist writer. But that's exactly why I find the mention embarrassing. I mean, I have never had to take chances or risks or sacrifices in the...
What did you think of the article?
I agree with Christopher. It was immensely flattering, but Orwell to me was the person I read when I was 12, 13, 14. He is such an icon for me in terms of less his actual substantive politics, which I respect, although disagreed with in some respects, than the honesty and decency of his writing, the sheer clarity of his prose, which is a model for anybody, and the idea that I could be equated with him was immensely flattering, but also, I think, way too flattering.
Let me ask you a number of questions.
I winced even more at Andrew being compared with him, but I mean, I winced when I was.
Yeah, I understand that. If you had to choose a country to live in besides Great Britain and the United States?
India.
India?
Yeah,
You would live there.
I love India. I've often felt, it's the only place I've ever felt so instantly at home. I mean, it must seem incongruous when you look at me and so, but
Andrew?
I love India.
Sullivan?
I would die. I wouldn't live
You would
anywhere
not
else.
pick anywhere else?
No.
Delton, Michigan, you're on the air.
Thank you, Brian. Thank God for C-SPAN. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
I was wondering if we could take a different tack on the vice president being sued by the GAO. And was wondering, the other day on Wednesday, one of your guests was asked the question whether a French book that had come out recently, it was the Bin Laden, The Forbidden Truth, that was asking the question whether we had dealings with the Taliban over oil or importation to that country. And he blew it off as that was old news, and he didn't want to talk about it. But I was just wondering, could that be the gist of some of the information that is wanting to be looked at? Thank you.
I don't know, and I don't know about the story that you mentioned. I've heard of it, but I imagine that other people would pursue it if it had real salience. Look, I think, however, that the government should be forthright with who comes into the White House and so on. I do not believe, however, that every government conversation, every detail of every conversation should be divulged to the public. I don't believe in completely transparent government. It's different than open government. Government should be open to inquiry, but transparency would mean there are a certain sphere of freewheeling ideas and thought and opinions that I think our leaders need in a safe environment to be able to talk over things and to think the unthinkable and to say things that if it came out would be politically embarrassing. And I think that kind of freedom for effective government is important, and I'm nervous that if the GAO wins, there'll be no ability for government to have serious confidential discussions in future.
You see, that really shows that you do have the soul of a Tory in a funny way.
I do.
You think these people have a sort of natural right to rule?
No, no.
Well,
I just think that there is a clearly you cannot govern effectively unless you can talk freely amongst yourselves
as you
at
must,
some
but
point.
you know very well, you've just been praising the fact that Mr. Bush, as long as he can control the way it's done, can make us aware of his private diary, as long as it can be given to the Washington Post so that they have control over the image presented, whereas what Congressman Waxman is asking, and the GAO is asking, is not for the conversations between the Vice President and his staff or anything like that. They want to know what the input was from people who've since benefited, the people who made campaign donations, and whether they were protected or not. That's a very legitimate question. It's more in the nature of a police inquiry.
Can I ask you a question about the diary? Apparently, and I say apparently, I didn't see it, I've read it, that the Bush White House let one of these reporters, Dan Bolts or Bob Woodward, look at his diary around the time of September the 11th. What then happens if someone someday says, we want to subpoena the diary, and they say executive privilege? I mean, what's the difference?
Look, the difference is very simple. The difference, this is about privacy, and it's a very important matter. It's being destroyed in our culture. The ability to have any private communications is being destroyed among private citizens as well among public officials.
So the president will be allowed to show it when he wants to, but then not show it when he doesn't
absolutely.
want to?
It is his prerogative whether his own private matter should be, I mean, genuinely private matters should be dispersed to the public. Without that, we'd have a camera in his bedroom. I mean, the guy has to have some kind of zone.
No one would turn on. No one would watch it.
How can you govern a country when everything you say in private can be...
The White House, maybe where he lives, it is not his home, it is not his house, it belongs to the people. It was Mr. Clinton's idea, and particularly Mrs. Clinton's idea, to seek a privacy defense precisely by saying, this is our place, not yours.
I don't agree with that.
You can't allow
I agree with you on that
one.
Christopher. I mean, clearly. However, you've got to have some sphere in which you can talk freely with people in an unofficial capacity to get advice and thoughts. I think you should divulge exactly who they are, all their contacts, when they came, when they left. But I think you should be able to have some privacy within that.
So you think the Vice President ought to give these names and dates and times?
I think names, dates, times, but not necessarily content, because I think they should be free to do so if they want to, but I think it could violate the possibility of governing at all.
West Seneca, New York, on the Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning to all. I turned the C-SPAN on and, just flipped through the channels. You came on. And it's Alan Sullivan, correct?
No, Andrew.
Andrew, okay. Excuse me. And you're the editor of the New Republic Senior.
No, I'm a senior editor. My main gig is andrewsullivan.com, the website. Quick plug.
When I came on, I may be, correct me if I'm not mistaken, you said that you're gay?
That I am, yes.
Okay, so that's homosexual.
Yes.
Okay, and you said that you're a Christian also?
I did.
Okay, well, there's a letter that was written to the church that was in Rome a long time ago in the New Testament, and it speaks of, if you don't mind, I'll just quote, it says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God's made it plain to them. And he's clearly seen by, and understood by the things that he's made. It says right here that, it says, well, although they knew God, they didn't glorify him as God or give him thanks, but their thinking became futile and their foolish heart was darkened. And my point's coming up. Although they claimed to be wise and know God, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, birds and animals and reptiles. Okay, it says, therefore God gave them over to sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the created things rather than the Creator.
Thanks, Carl.
I was about to say, how much more of that were you going to take?
Well, because he's citing, I think he's citing Romans, and he's leading up to the condemnation of homosexuality, or at least what St. Paul seemed to think was homosexuality. Let me say, I will leave your conscience to you and your God, and maybe you will leave my conscience to me and mine. Well, broadly speaking, there is enormous numbers of things in the Gospels, and not in the Gospels, but in the Bible and the Old Testament, which are clearly forbidden. For example, all sorts of kosher regulations. Not many Christians contemporarily follow those kosher regulations. In fact, the Bible says that if you are gay, you should be stoned to death. This is a practice that is upheld in many parts of the world. What I would ask of any Christian fundamentalist who believes
this book is the work of God.
I believe that it's inspired by the Word of God.
Well, then I leave you with it. I mean,
you've left me. I've lived with it my entire life, Christopher. You're welcome.
You just said to this guy, you can have your God and I can have mine.
No, I did not.
What? Why? Yes, you did.
No, I did not. I said your conscience.
It's a la carte religion.
No, it's not a la carte.
The word of God, or it's not, surely.
No, Christopher. There are many themes in Christian belief, and only one of them is a fundamentalist one, in which every single word of the Bible is absolutely, literally true. I don't happen to hold that particular view. I'm a Catholic. I believe the Bible has to be interpreted through one's own experience, one's own faith experience, through the tradition of the Church and the Scriptures.
The tradition of the Church is to say that something that's essential to your nature is a filthy sin.
No, it isn't. The condition. No, let me just correct you on that, because it's very important. The teaching of the Church, which is on this matter,
the teaching of the non-pedophile wing of the Church.
It is not a sin.
The teaching of the non-pedophile wing of that Church.
You can leave your anti-Catholic slurs elsewhere.
That's not anti-Catholic. It's not I who shelter these abusers.
The point. Now, I'm not defending those people either. The point of the Church, I know, and I have been very harsh on them as well. However, let me say this and make the point. So the Church officially says that being gay is not a sin. Only acting upon it in a sexual manner is regarded as sinful. This
casuistry of the lowest kind.
Well,
it's like saying hate the sin and love the sinner.
I think it is. About your nature. I think it is when you actually reflect upon it and read it and think about it incoherent. My book, Virtually Normal, has the whole chapter dealing with this issue.
Let me share with you all some
very good book, by the way.
Emails.
Thank you, Christopher.
From Joyce. Boys, congratulations. You have really two of the lowest of journalists to grace your stage today. Seems easy for you to cater to that thinking so frequently anymore. I just can't gush how wonderful C-SPAN is. Confused. Jay Montgomery says, I'm deeply disappointed in you, Andrew Sullivan and Christopher Hitchens. They are like two peas on the same pod. There's not a dime's worth of difference between the two of them. They are both right-wing extremists. Andrew Sullivan is the worst of the worst, and Hitchens is not far behind. I stopped my subscription of the Nation magazine because of Hitchens.
Nice.
Are you a right-winger?
We can take that as a
if you were to pick
a comment.
If you were to pick somebody, you
extremist.
got to be quick about this. If you're going to pick somebody in the world right now that you would like to lead the world, name them.
No, I wouldn't. I don't think like that. I'm not a leader worshipper. I'm not a follower, as it were.
Okay, but you still.
I think people should be citizens and think for themselves and.
If you were to become a member of a political party in this country, could you name one?
No, certainly not.
Do you like Ralph Nader?
Yes, I'm very fond of Ralph Nader. I mean, well, that sounds silly. I'm a great admirer of the integrity and courage of Ralph Nader.
The integrity of Ralph Nader, who is now sort of joining the likes of Ramsey Clark in railing against this war.
I disagree with him very much about the war, but I think that everything Ralph does is for the best of motives.
Corpus Christi, Texas, on the Democrats.
Everything Ralph does is for the best of motives. Why does your skepticism disappear?
Corpus Christi, Texas. Go ahead, please, now.
Good morning, Chris. This is for you, and Mr. Sullivan. You're okay.
That's all I can hope for.
Chris, I owned a small business, a computer store, and we were kind of drummed out of business by foreign trade, and it was mostly instrumented by people within our own country, big corporations who go to foreign countries like Korea and pump these things back in at below cost and destroyed our industry. And I started following the money and following the money and following the money. And it came up on the Carlyle Group. And I went, wow, this is interesting, the Carlyle Group, of which George Bush used to be one of the directors of. Then this thing with Enron happened. And I went, well, this is real interesting. So So I did some more following the money, and I came up on James Baker, who happened to be the lawyer who advised the people at Enron, who happens to be a good friend of George Bush. And it all goes back to a big corporation. Actually, it was purchased by this big corporation called AIG. AIG owns everything. They own everything. And if you look real close, you'll find that AIG and Enron has dealings all over the Asia, the Middle East, and the concept that the administration doesn't know about what happened at Enron, I'm sure is ridiculous, because his dad's involved in it. His sister's, Kathleen Bush, is one of the main administrators for AIG. And
Kathleen
I was just wondering if...
Whoa. Kathleen, whose sister? Kathleen Bush?
Well, not his sister, but his relative. Kathleen Bush out of Connecticut.
Oh.
AIG.
One of the Connecticut Bushes. Well, look, it used to make me laugh a few years ago when I would come on the show and Ross Perot fans would call in. Remember when there were Ross Perot fans? And they would say, they agreed with Ross. He said, what do they think was so great about Perot? Because Perot wants to run the country as if it was a corporation. I thought, well, why does he want that? He already is run like a corporation. A rather ill-managed one, perhaps, in some ways. There is a wing of, particularly the Republican Party, that I think does think that the cabinet is a board of directors and the president is a CEO, and I think what they must think that makes us is either their customers or perhaps their employees.
How about the shareholders?
It's a psyche, and it's ill-programmed, of course, this psyche, to notice conflict of interest, because it doesn't believe there could be a conflict of interest. What is good for any business that gives money to the Republican Party is definitely axiomatically good for America. It's the identity of interest that impresses me, and it appears from different experiences on your part to have impressed you too, as it should.
I think this is somewhat paranoid. I do think that and I agree with Christopher, there is too much, I think, in some ways, corporate influence in Washington. However, I don't think that the American Constitution is the same as the workings of a business corporation. I think that you have too little faith in the possibility. I don't think the Supreme Court is run that way. I don't think our press has that impulse. I think many people in the Congress and the Senate do not have that impulse either. And if you ran most corporations like the way we run Washington, nothing would ever get produced and nothing would ever get sold. This is not designed to be an efficient corporation. It's designed to be a very inefficient democracy. And I think those people on the left that want to, in some ways, smear the American Constitution by association with legitimate business interests that have a legitimate right to contribute to the debate in the society are doing the Constitution and the United States a disservice.
In this email, Christopher, you are admired by conservatives like me because you are always intellectually honest. Andrew, you've got a dynamite website. To both, who is your #1 favorite political columnist, the one you consider the most intellectually honest? Linda, you're Christopher's biggest fan in Georgia. Who's your favorite columnist?
Of the mainstream, I mean, I think William Safire is the one I find
Andrew Sullivan?
the most readable, I mean, the most literate, and also very often the most imaginative.
Mr. Sullivan?
You know, it's very funny. I agree with Christopher. I don't think he's had a terribly good war, as it were. I don't think his column's been that brilliant over the war, but I do think Safire is an honest man, reports very well, writes very sharply. I also think that Charles Krauthammer's columns on foreign policy are models of lucidity and conviction.
Who's the best on the left?
Christopher Hitchens.
I'm saying besides the two of you.
Oh.
Well, if we can't nominate each other, but then this isn't supposed to be a love fest. I'm just trying to think who I would say was...
Palm Desert, California, Republican, you're on the air.
Yes, I just wondered what you thought of the debates. And I thought Al Gore acted like such a buffoon, and I can't believe people voted for him like they did. Maybe that explains the ballot misunderstanding in Florida, but boy, I mean, you know, all 3 debates, he interrupted, lied, walked over and stood by Bush with kind of a dumb look on his face. It was better than any Saturday Night Live thing that we've seen in the last few years.
Well, of course, I remember after that first debate, George Stephanopoulos coming on as an unbiased ABC News reporter and saying that Gore clearly won the debate. My jaw hit the floor. I thought Bush won every single debate by a mile, and wrote so at the time, and I thought he'd won the presidency. I think the only reason Gore did so well in the election was because he was running at a time of unparalleled prosperity. He was the incumbent. He should have won by any historical standard by 10 or 15 points. That's what every political scientist predicted in the spring. He didn't, because he was an absolutely execrable candidate. He threw away any convictions he ever had. He did whatever needed to get to power. And I think he deserved to lose. And I hope to God he doesn't run again and put us through all that trauma one more time.
The best columnist writing from the left is a guy who isn't in the mainstream so much. Is called Adolph Reed.
Where do you see him?
In the Progressive, sometimes in the Village Voice, elsewhere. He's a very distinguished academic as well. Has written a number of books. Recently, a biography of Booker T. Washington. Anyway, I think he writes extremely well, very fiercely, very funny, and I recommend him if people want to seek out a
I can't think of
columnist.
any. I think the left is so intellectually dead at this point that there's almost no life among it.
Excuse me, his book is about W.B. Du Bois. I didn't at all mean to say Booker T. Washington.
Let's go
Very
to
good study of Du Bois.
Bedford, Indiana, waiting. Let's go. We've got a couple of minutes left. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, and please let me get my issues in. Mr. Sullivan, the hate that you have for the left-wing party is just simply terrible. And I'd also like to ask you about the journalists. There's been 8 journalists that have lost their lives in Afghanistan. Because of the secrecy of this administration, they're not allowed to travel with the military. They have to be on their own, and there have been 8 journalists killed, and 1 is kidnapped. And also, I think that I hope that C-SPAN will have 2 liberals on next week to talk about their points, since you are so, well, it's just terrible the way you talk about Clinton and Gore. I think it all depends on which side you're sitting on, because right now George W. Bush is the media's darling. He was all through the campaign. I've read some books. I can't talk like you can. I don't have the backing to do that. But it's such a shame when you get on and you talk about one president being sleazy, that the left party is dead. You know, we need a balance here. One party can't be right all the time, and it's shameful when you get on and say the things that you do.
They sure can't be right all the time, which is why I hope for at some point some intellectual revival on the left that can actually be interesting and dynamic and contribute to a real debate. Unfortunately, I don't see that right now. I think it's exhausted and needs to reinvent itself and rethink itself, and I think many people on the left agree with me. So that's how I would respond to that. I don't think I feel hate in that sense. I feel strong disagreement. And I think we should stop attempting to turn these disagreements, these strong disagreements, into emotional things. You can strongly disagree with someone on many issues and still respect them as a human being. And that kind of civility is absolutely important if we are to be able to debate these things.
Could I just say, as someone who was reporting recently from Pakistan, and who knows some of these people, and is very concerned about the safety of Mr. Pearl from the Wall Street Journal, just in case anyone believed that, it's absolutely not true that journalists seek the protection of the armed forces when they're in regions. They often want to travel with them to be able to report on what they're doing, and there's often an argument about access, but there's no sense in which the U.S. Army left journalists defenseless or out in the cold. We're not supposed to be agents of the state or wards of the Defense Department.
And
you go to places like that at your own risk. And
all
it
8
should
of
never
the
be any other
journalists
way.
are foreign journalists?
I don't think any American has been killed. A number of Australians and French, and 1 Italian.
Did you feel like you were in a dangerous, I mean, now that we see the Danny Pearl story, you feel you were in a dangerous spot?
It makes me wince to think of how easily anyone else could have fallen into the simple but nasty trap that they set for him. Look, we'll take you to see one of the mystery mullahs if you'll come in this unmarked car with us. I mean, most people would have said yes to that.
Let's go to Swansea.
So it has a very chilling effect indeed.
Swansea, South Carolina, you're next.
Well, good morning, Complaints Fan. I'd like to say this to Mr. Hitchens.
I love it.
Maybe he could, if you want to know why the left's receding faster than his hairline, then all you have to do is listen to what he said about religion. He's unwilling for people to live under the tyranny of their own conscience, which is basically what religion is, but he'd be perfectly happy to have us all live under the tyranny of 1,000 or 1,000,000 socialist bureaucrats. All you have to do is examine the intellectual dishonesty of that to see where he's coming from.
If receding
It's very
hairlines is a function, is a sign of one's intellectual decrepitude, then I'm really in trouble.
How do you know where my hairline was before, by the way?
I don't know if you heard him, though. He slipped in an
It's interesting, though, how often the loving Christian types begin with a nasty ad hominem remark, and they go on, of course, to get stupider and stupider. The idea of living under the tyranny of your own conscience is not what religion says at all. Religion says you have to live under a code transmitted through holy books and divine warrant. And so those of us who live with the tyranny only of our own conscience and believe that an ethical life can be lived without reference to the supernatural are called humanists, or atheists, or in my case, anti-theists. You have it precisely wrong, sir, but then say you would.
Did you hear him slip in the complaint spam?
I did. I thought that was sweet.
What does that mean?
Well, if you've listened to this network continuously for 23 years, you would think that an awful lot of people in the United States are very unhappy all the time.
Oh, right.
Because that's the nature of the beast. People that call don't call.
Well, it's
to
like
say,
letters
"Isn't
to
it
the
great?"
editor or emails you get to the website. They're all angry. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them are angry.
It's a very noticeable thing. If people write into the magazine, it's almost always to disagree. Not invariably, but if people come up to you, as they will after this show, people will recognize us in the street later today, it's always to be friendly. It's always to say something nice. I don't think I've ever been abused in person, so they save that for the email and the phone calls.
My favorite
and the
moment was a guy that came up to me once in the street and went, oh, I hate you. So I get that all the time, but I have a lot of anger at me from the gay community for being conservative and a believer, and then I also have anger from the other side that I'm gay, and one learns to live in some ways a valley of anger all the time, and try and stick to what one thinks, and one can only hope is true to oneself.
Well,
if one dishes it out, one must be prepared
What's
to
the
face it.
strangest thing that's ever happened to you in a public position like this? Somebody coming up to you.
Got me. I'm just trying to think. Got me. I'm just trying to think.
It's never strange.
Well, I haven't got a favourite anecdote about it. I'm sorry.
Kansas
if I
City.
do, I'll think of it on the way home, and I'll be furious.
Call next
I'll
week.
call it.
Okay. Kansas City, last call. Go ahead, please.
Hi there. I was calling to say how much I like you both.
Oh,
and Andrew Sullivan, I am...
What a waste of a call.
Oh, it is not a waste of a call. I agree with you on so many things, and I especially agree with you about privacy, especially as regards to homosexuality. You should be entitled to do as you please, even though, as a Christian, I don't agree with you. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be welcome in the Christian church.
Thanks, caller.
Thank you.
We have a final fax here. I'll read. Would your present guest please consider hosting some sort of a talk show? I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is to see and hear two truly provocative, in the best sense of the word, and articulate people on TV. This almost never happens. Here we have no spin. Here I stand. I can do no other as a mantra. Please give us more. We desperately need this to help keep us balanced, as rational as we can be. Robert Thornton of Wilmington, North Carolina. That is our last moment. Would you like to comment? Do you have a goodbye message for
Look,
America?
if one can be compared for integrity to George Orwell, one can be compared for flintiness to Martin Luther, as there. But I don't think the idea of being on television all the time would be good for either of us, frankly.
Mr.
I agree.
It should be occasional.
I think that it should be occasional. I have no desire to become a TV person. I find it in some ways very difficult to deal with sometimes. One's privacy is often destroyed in small pieces by it, and I think that both of us probably regard ourselves as writers first. The written word is what matters, which is why my preferred medium at this point is the internet and the website, which allows one to broadcast, but through the written word rather than the talking head.
AndrewSullivan.com. And thank you both, Christopher Hitchens and Andrew Sullivan, for 2 hours with us here on a Friday morning, February 1st, 2002.